It was 2013 and I was 12 years old at the time. This horrific incident happened to my cousins Jack and Liam. Jack was 2 years older than me and lived near the Sherman Ranch in the southeast of Ballard near Utah. It was mid-July and I was enjoying my summer holidays to the fullest. My parents decided to take me to my aunt's house for a week to hang out with my cousins, and I was really happy because my cousin Jack was the only friend I had back in 2013. I was excited to go on adventures with Jack as we used to do. He was also excited after hearing that I was coming over with my family. The next day, my parents and I packed all of my essential stuff with us, and we started our journey in the morning. By noon of the same day, we arrived at Jack's house. Jack was so happy to see me, and he told me that him and his brother Liam had planned some crazy things for us to do. I had never been to Jack's house before because he would usually come to mine, and this was my first time seeing his home. Jack always used to tell me about his house and the vast abandoned ranch that's outside of it, and now I finally got to see all those things that I had only imagined in my mind before. After eating lunch, Jack, Liam, and I went into Jack's room, where they told me about their plan. They told me that they were going to go play a game of scavenger hunt on the ranch at night, and when I asked them, but why only at night? We can also play scavenger hunt in the morning. Because no one is allowed to enter the ranch and there are guards at the gates, so it'll be easier to sneak in when it's dark so the guards can't see us entering the ranch, Liam and Jack replied. As I mentioned before, I didn't have many friends, so I did not know much about the scavenger hunt, and I asked them to tell me the game's rules. They told me about the rules and that I would have to find 5 clues that Jack and Liam hid in the ranch. I had to find them using a flashlight while Jack and Liam would help me by giving me hints during the game, to which I agreed as it seemed very interesting to me. At night we told our parents that we were going to Jack's friend's house who lived in a nearby town. We had to lie to them because we knew that if we told them the truth, that we were going to sneak into the ranch at night, they would refuse to let us go. I didn't know much about the ranch and the mysterious things that have happened there. And even Jack and Liam didn't know because they had just moved into their new home near the ranch about a year ago. Long story short, our parents agreed and we took Jack's dog Max for our safety and we went off to the ranch. The place was surrounded by metal wires, which wasn't that hard to get through. Once we passed through the wires, we had to be quiet so that the security guards wouldn't hear us. But they were too busy talking to each other in their cabin, so they weren't much of a concern. After sneaking inside the ranch, Jack gave me my first hint and told me to go find the clue. And after some time, I found my first clue. Then they told me that the next clue was on a tree. When I looked around, I saw a bunch of trees in the distance, and I went there in search of the second clue. Max was also investigating with us, and eventually, after a few minutes, I found the second clue. When I pointed my flashlight at one of the trees, I was shocked to see that there were giant claw marks all around it. As soon as I found the clue, I heard a rustling sound like something was running on the dry leaves. Max looked worried and started barking. We started looking around and suddenly we froze to the ground. My heart was jumping out, and the rustling sound was getting louder and louder, and just then, I saw something had attacked Max. It was like a wolf, but much, much bigger in size. Liam ran and picked up a stick from the ground and started hitting the creature on his back. After a few seconds, the wolf stood up on his 2 feet like a human. We were all terrified when we looked at his giant teeth coming out of his mouth. Suddenly, he attacked Liam with his claws and then threw him away, then started fighting Max again. Liam was severely injured and continuously bleeding. We didn't know what to do, so Jack started yelling for help. After a few minutes passed and we were just watching Max fight to the death, listening to his painful groans, we then heard a gunshot. Fortunately, those guards came to our rescue, but the initial shots did not affect the wolf-like creature. One of the guards fired 3 more bullets and the creature started running off into the woods while holding onto Max in his mouth. We nervously told the guards about Liam and they immediately called the ambulance. Luckily, Liam was alright, but he was badly wounded by the creature. He remained at the hospital for 3 months. Our parents were really mad at us after knowing all of this. They punished us by withholding our allowance money for 3 months, and I never went back to the ranch again. It still gives me goosebumps whenever I think about that creature, and his teeth still haunt me in my dreams. In 2015, I was studying in college and living the most depressing days of my life. My parents had just divorced a year ago, and I left my home after that so I can go to the state of Arizona where I was studying in college. I was living in a dorm with my roommate named Noah, and I was working a part-time job so that I could afford my expenses. But as you can imagine, life was so hard back then. I was on medications, my life was totally messed up, and I started having issues. My physical and mental health was getting worse day by day, and my roommate Noah was the only friend I had in my life, and he was also worried for me. He advised me to visit a psychiatrist, and I did. The psychiatrist ended up recommending that I go on some trip where I could refresh my mind and get rid of the toxic thoughts that were killing me from inside. To be very honest, I haven't gone on any trips for the last 3 years. The last time I had a trip was with my family to Hill Station, which ended up badly because my parents started fighting, and we ended up abandoning our plan. But this time, I wanted to go on some kind of adventure trip with my roommate Noah. On the same night, we were lying on our beds staring at the roof and sharing our ideas. As mentioned earlier, I didn't know of any places where we could go do some adventurous things, but Noah was not like me. He had an excellent company of friends in college. Unlike me, I was more of an introvert at the time. Noah knew exactly the best places we were looking for. Just then, we heard a knock on our room's door. I got out of bed and opened the door, and it was one of our classmate John, so I invited him inside. And Noah told me that he had called John because he would join us on our trip. He had a lot of experience doing things like this, meaning he visited many mysterious places before. For example, he used to work with ghost hunters many times in the past. He sat on the chair in our room and told us about the Sherman Ranch, notorious for paranormal activities, horrible creature sightings, and more importantly, aliens. He also pointed out that he had never seen aliens on his trips with ghost hunters, but we got excited when he mentioned it. I was a little bit scared when I heard him saying those things, but I didn't want to show them that I was shitting my pants, so I agreed by nodding my head. Only I knew what I felt when they were talking about such horrible things, or maybe they were just kidding about it and wanted to scare me. We planned to meet outside our college where John would arrive in his father's Jeep from where we would start our trip to Sherman Ranch. We packed some tents, snacks to eat while camping, and lighters to build up the campfire. The next day in the morning, John arrived outside our college with his dad's Jeep, and we went off to the southeast of Ballard, Utah. It was a long road trip, and by the evening, we eventually arrived at the Sherman Ranch. When we got there, we saw that the ranch was guarded by metal wires, and that's exactly when John came out for help, and he called one of his friends who used to live near the ranch. He was well aware of all the ways to get inside the ranch. After 5 minutes, John told us that he knew a way to get inside from the back. We drove, and after finding the way, we got inside the ranch. It was abandoned land with no house or even a single sign of humans for miles. It seemed like we were the only 3 people dumb enough to camp there, and we were also unaware of the danger we would face. After setting up our camps, we built a campfire, and by that time, it was totally dark. We decided to get out of our tents to explore the ranch with our flashlights and see if there was anything out there. I heard my roommate Noah yelling at me, "Hey, what's that red light?" John and I immediately turned and looked in the direction of the light. It was a bright red light coming from some distance. Our hearts filled with curiosity, and we started running toward the light. We ran for about 5 to 10 minutes, and we were surprised to see that it was this giant round-shaped machine where the lights were emitting from. Noah and I hid behind a rock, and something came out of the machine. We couldn't clearly see what it was, but we could see that it was not an average human or an animal because it was much bigger in size and had 3 legs. A wave of shiver ran throughout my body, and suddenly I heard Noah's voice. "Hey John, stop what you're doing, you idiot." John was trying to get close to the creature, and we tried to stop him, but he didn't listen, and he got closer to the point that he was just a few steps away from that scary thing. The creature emitted something like a laser light that hit John, and he fell to the ground and went unconscious instantly. After that, the creature got inside its machine and vanished into the sky. I don't know how to describe that thing, but it was horrible. We immediately put John inside his Jeep and rushed him to the nearby hospital. Doctors told us that John was saved, but a considerable amount of radiation was reported from his body. We told doctors about what happened to us, but they didn't believe us and thought that maybe we were just some young adults who were on drugs. We told everyone in our college about it, but no one believed us either. John, Noah, and I are the only ones who believe what we saw out there. It is still a mystery to this day to us what that thing was and what they were doing out there. My wife and I were looking for a new house back in 2013 because we were expecting a child in a month or 2. We were living in an apartment that only had 1 room, a kitchen, and 1 bathroom. We knew that our newborn child would need a separate room for his or her own private space, and by that time, after saving money for almost 3 years, we were financially stable enough to buy a new house. We started looking for a house that would suit our budget and was big enough in which my wife and I and our 2 children could live without any problem. Still, the prices of the properties were too high, and after 2 days, we were about to lose hope. Just then, at night, when my wife was searching for properties on Craigslist, an ad about a property located near Sherman Ranch crossed her eyes. The price of the house was very cheap. We didn't know why he was selling the property for so little. She immediately called me and told me to come home. When I arrived, she showed me the ad about the house. At first, the house seemed very beautiful in the pictures, and we decided to visit the property and meet the owner. The next day, I went to the Sherman Ranch with my wife. It looked strange when we noticed that the house was located in an abandoned area. There were no neighbors for miles on end, and large metal gates guarded the house. We ignored it by assuming that perhaps the owner had some security threats. The owner had the cows outside his house, and some of them were severely injured. It seemed like someone had cut them from their stomach, and the cuts were very perfectly drawn, like someone had performed some kind of horrible experiments on them. But we ignored them and knocked on the door of the house, but no one came. After knocking several times, we heard a mumbled voice from inside. "Who is outside?" I replied, "We saw your property ad on Craigslist." The door was opened by an old man with his trembling hand, and he told us to come inside. We went inside and looked around. The house was pretty identical to what we saw in the pictures, but one thing was strange in the house. Every window of the house was covered by metal rods, and it seemed like the old man was a very religious person because there were holy crosses in every corner of the house. I asked the owner about his family, but he told me that he had no family. He used to live with his 2 sons and wife, but they all died mysteriously. I felt sorry for him and then asked him about the metal rods on the windows. I noticed that he became very nervous while telling me about the windows and that it was just for safety and nothing else. I didn't argue with him about it. I asked him why he was selling the house at such a low price because the property was quite big in size as compared to the price at which he was selling it, and he told us that he just needed some money so that he could spend the last days of his life in a city which he always dreamt about. After all the paperwork, I shook hands with the owner and we moved into our new house. We were so happy after getting our new home, and my wife starting setting up all the things in the house according to her choice. But one day when she was cleaning up the basement, she found a note in an old box that said, "Leave this house." My wife showed me the note, but I ignored it by assuming that it maybe belonged to the older man. Strange things started to happen from the first day we moved into the house. Things began to fall and disappear from their places, but we didn't pay much attention to it. By that time, our baby was born, and we were very happy the day my wife got discharged from the hospital. But when we got back home, we were shocked to see that our house was all messed up like someone had broken into it while we were gone. I reported it to the police, but they didn't find any evidence of someone doing this. One day my wife and I were sleeping in our room, and we heard a giggling sound of our child. We ran to his room and were surprised to see that the child was locked inside the closet. We immediately unlocked the closet, and that was the first time I yelled at my wife for doing such a stupid thing, but she refused to admit it. On the same night when we went back to sleep, we woke up to a sound coming from outside our house. It was midnight, and we were hearing painful cries of a woman from outside our house. I ran towards the roof and was freaked out to see that a woman in white clothes was sitting under the tree outside our house, and she was continuously crying. I immediately called the police and told them about it, but when they arrived she was gone. Obviously we couldn't sleep after that, so I went to the room where my wife was sitting and feeding our son. After some time, my wife told me that she needed to go to the restroom, and she handed me over the baby. I was watching TV and I heard a knock on the window. I froze on the ground after I saw that my wife was standing outside of our house and screaming for help. I immediately ran towards the door, but when I was about to open it, someone touched my shoulder. When I turned back, it was my wife saying, "Where are you going?" My mind stopped working for a second and I told her, "No, I was just making sure that the door was locked." I didn't want to scare her because we had a lot of paranormal activity in one night. When we got inside our room, my wife asked me, "Why were you knocking at the restroom door?" I gawked at her face when I heard it, but I didn't tell her that it wasn't me. The next day we packed our things, left that house, and moved back into our previous apartment. After 1 year, a businessman interested in the paranormal stuff purchased that property from us at an excellent price, and we never went back to that ranch after that incident. It still gives us shivers whenever we think about what happened that night, and the unexplained questions begin to revolve in our minds.